the government is in an extremely sensitive position. First of all, Macron has absolutely no legitimacy anymore. He managed to antagonize virtually every strand of French society. So they are very much afraid of being branded as some kind of ultra-hardcore neoliberal neo-fascists if they impose what the majority of the French population wants right now. Because they're so, to use a Russian image, this is a matryoshka. It's an extremely complex issue that involves everything that happened in terms of immigration to Europe after the start of the Arab Spring. It involves organized crime. It involves Salafi jihadi networks in all major cities in France, very well established. And it involves, of course, maybe interference, to quote the Americans, of foreign forces. Because don't forget, Macron is not totally aligned with the Americans in terms of antagonizing China. So that's how complicated it is.
Now let's talk a little bit more about what you just said, the center of this whole thing, because Macron has laid the blame for what's happening on the parents of rioters, on social media, and even on video games. What do you think are actually more of the specific real root causes of the unrest? And of course, you mentioned that there might be outside interference. Is this a genuine revolt, or what else is there?
Exactly. Okay, now we start to get into the heart of the matter. The number one issue is the absolute failure of multicultural France. Immigrants from vast swathes of Black Africa or from the Maghreb, Northern Africa, many of them, if they don't have a proper education to start with, or if they don't acquire proper education in France, which is very complicated if you are from a poor family, an underprivileged family, and you cannot get into the best schools, for instance, you are automatically marginalized. There are serious problems of integration, especially concerning young people from the Maghreb, second or third generation, in fact. They live in the so-called cités, which would be the French equivalent of the Brazilian favelas. And they are segregated, they are discriminated against. Police treats them like non-citizens, in fact. And there's an enormous amount of bitterness vis-a-vis, of course, what we call a Français de souche, which are real Caucasian, white, French from older families. Families have been in France or were born in France for centuries. So there is a divide. And the cités, the favelas, they are invisible from most of the city. When they show up, I'll give an a practical example. They show up in droves Saturday night on the Champs-Élysées, for instance. And the tourists and the French get terrified. Oh, these people may start something, you see? So the degree of racism, of latent racism and overt racism is enormous. Of course, the way, if you get into an argument, for instance, with one of these young kids from Algeria, Tunisia, or Morocco, and you say one wrong word, immediately he qualifies you as racist, and things can get pretty hardcore, immediately. So there is a divide inside the big cities, especially Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and the situation in Lyon and Marseille, as I'm sure everybody is aware now, was even more complicated than here in the suburbs of Paris. And there's the presence of an intertwined presence of everything that happened after the Arab Spring in terms of, especially France. They absorbed elements, let's put it this way, that were unwanted in many countries in West Asia, the Middle East. And at the same time, when they came here, they started to interact with organized crime. So this is an absolutely lethal mix, and this is what we saw these past few days. We had different layers of looting. And the most sophisticated layer was classic organized crime. They had 3 different layers of attacking businesses and going for things that really matter, like car dealerships, ATMs, etc. They were not looting Apple stores. This is for, let's say, the average looter. So that's why it's so complicated. There is a religious angle, there is a geopolitical, geoeconomic angle, there's an organized crime angle, and there's an angle of the absolute failure of the French states to regulate and to respect these immigrants that they called to come to France in the first place.
There is so much complexity there. And in reference to the ethnic part of this, France has been responsible for much colonialism in Africa. Is this now the chickens coming home to roost in a way for France?
But there's no question about that, especially Northern Africa. Most of these, let's say, the kids who are working for organized crime, most of them are from the Maghreb, from Northern Africa. They are blacks as well, and there are even a few underprivileged whites as well. But this is a heavy thing because this is connected with the rulers, the organized crime bosses. They are usually Algerians or Moroccans or Tunisians. And the most extraordinary thing, which I think many people outside of France don't know yet, is that the plot line that we are into it now was unveiled over a year ago by a movie. It's on Netflix, but not on Netflix International. It has been shown on Netflix France. It's called Athena. Athena is the name of a big favela that explodes when exactly a young Algerian is shot by police, which in the end, according to the plot, was not police, was extreme right paramilitary gangs, which is something that could have happened here. We still don't know. We don't have smoking guns. But this could be a paramilitary gang allied to security services who's interested into internal disturbance of France to force the hand of the government to go after these cités, these favelas, organized crime, these very, very dodgy imams in some parts of Paris suburbs like Saint-Denis, for instance. So you see, everything is intertwined all the time. And you cannot point to a culprit behind everything because everyone is a culprit, starting with the French state, starting with previous administrations and culminating with an administration that absolutely doesn't care about the plight of these minorities that have not and will never be integrated into French society.
Now, you talk about the racial divide and the different complexities. So the family of the policeman has raised over €1 million, in contrast to the family of the killed teen, which only raised nearly €200,000. Now, in coalescence with the factions of far-right groups that we're seeing now marching the streets, what do you make of that, of these factions marching there? And what does that say about the current sentiment around this incident?
Well, look, the current sentiment in terms of French people who tend to sympathize with Marine Le Pen's Front National, former Front National, and consider themselves not extreme right, but conservatives and patriots. They absolutely want to stop immigration like tomorrow, or it should have been stopped years ago, in fact. They blame essentially the open door policy, which, as we know, is a feature of not only the Great Reset from now to the future, but from the previous mindset of the European Union and the European Commission. You cannot have open borders when you are, for instance, after the Arab Spring, you have a lot of very radicalized elements that profited from it to come to France, to Belgium, to Germany, to Switzerland. And don't forget that what's happening in France has already overspilled to Belgium and Switzerland, among others. It could overspill to the UK sooner or later, because it's more or less the same problem. Uncontrolled immigration, and included in these legal or not so legal elements, they are extremely radicalized Salafi jihadi elements. And these people are working for the Salafi jihadi leaders who are in the suburbs of Paris, who are in Marseille, who are in Molenbeek in Brussels, who are in parts of Switzerland. So this is the blowback for what happened since the West as a whole decided to destabilize parts of West Asia, the Middle East, especially Syria. And now the back and forth with Syria, we're going to see people who don't have a job in Syria anymore because radicals in Syria have been either they are confined to Idlib or they have been expelled. They're coming back to Europe. And when they come back to Paris, what do? Organized crime and traffic of weapons. Don't forget that these cités, favelas, they are already awash with weapons, including weapons coming from Ukraine as well. So you see, this is a snowball. Weapons before that were provided by the Kosovo mafia, especially in France and in Belgium. Weapons that come by cargoes in Antwerp, in Belgium. Weapons that come from Ukraine from any way you can imagine. So now you have this tons of weapons here in selected parts of France, especially. And this could be just, I would say, an aperitif, a test drive for something that could explode later on and will be even more lethal everywhere. And that's what's so terrifying. Even if people, they cannot see these connections, organized crime, Arab Spring, weapons, syndicates, etc., they feel that this is just the beginning.
Well, definitely tons of layers there to explore. Independent geopolitical analyst and author and columnist for the Cradle, Pepe Escobar. Thank you, Pepe.
Thank you.